What if everything you think you know about yourself is a lie? This question isn't an accusation, but an invitation. It's a gentle ringing of a bell beneath the surface of your ordinary life, urging you to awaken not to new beliefs, but to truths forgotten. There comes a time, often disguised as crisis, confusion, or unease, when the image you've so carefully constructed begins to crumble, and in its shattering something ancient stirs. According to Jung, each person is born whole, possessing a totality of psyche, light and dark, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. Yet from the moment you enter the world, you begin to forget, unintentionally but inevitably. You learn to please, to perform, to adapt. You take on roles, you develop a persona, a mask you wear to meet the expectations of family, culture, and society. This mask isn't inherently false. It's a tool, a protective shell that allows you to move among others. But when the mask is mistaken for the face, when the performance becomes the identity, the soul retreats, not in protest, but in patience. It waits deep within the labyrinth of the unconscious, shrouded in symbols, guarded by shadows. A moment may arrive when the mask begins to crack. You feel weary, disoriented, even afraid. But this, too, is sacred. This great forgetting is starting to fall apart. The path to the soul begins not with certainty, but with doubt, not with enlightenment, but with disillusionment. You begin to ask, who am I when I'm no longer performing? Whose dreams am I actually living? Whose voices have I mistaken for my own? These questions don't destroy, they liberate. Jung taught that the soul is never truly lost. It's simply covered, buried beneath layers of unconscious material, inherited fears, learned roles, repressed desires. To find it is not to strive outward, but to delve inward into the forest of symbols, into the mirrors of dream, into the unlit corridors of your forgotten self. You won't reclaim your soul through perfection or obedience. You won't find it by being good or right. You'll find it only when you're willing to enter the labyrinth of your own psyche with a torch in hand and confront the guardians of your forgotten truths. The journey begins when you stop asking who others want you to be and start listening for the quiet voice that has been whispering all along. Return, you are more than a mask. You've stood at the threshold of disillusionment, where the mask begins to slip and the soul begins to awaken. Now the question arises, what comes next? What path awaits the one who dares to look inward, to descend beneath the surface of their presented self? Carl Jung called this path individuation, but don't mistake it for mere self-improvement, for it is no ascent to perfection. It's not about polishing the ego or conforming to an ideal. Individuation is a pilgrimage, not outward to temples or mountaintops, but inward to the sacred territory of your own psyche. This journey doesn't move in straight lines. It spirals, it circles back, it descends before it ascends. Along the way, you won't become someone new. You'll become more whole, not fragmented, but complete. Individuation requires you to encounter every part of your inner landscape. The rationale and the instinctive, the emotional and the archetypal, the known and the hidden. Each part has a voice. Each carries a piece of your truth, and none can be excluded without consequence. Individuation is about gathering the scattered pieces of your soul, not judging them, but knowing them, the shadow you've rejected, the dreams you've forgotten, the impulses you've feared, the powers you've disowned. You must meet them all, not as enemies to be subdued, but as lost brothers and sisters returning home. In this sacred reunion, nothing is lost. Even those parts you once banished, your anger, your fear, your desires, hold gifts if you're willing to listen. Jung taught that only what is made conscious can be transformed. What remains unconscious does not disappear. It directs your life from behind the scenes until you turn and face it. Thus you begin not with certainty, but with sincerity. Not as a hero seeking victory, but as a seeker longing for wholeness. Individuation isn't a task to be completed, it's a life to be lived. It's the soul's long-awaited remembering of who you always were, beneath the noise, the roles, the masks. And with each step toward that wholeness, you move closer to something unshakable. Not security, not ease, but authenticity. The quiet power of one who lives from the inside out, not the outside in. This is the way. Not up, not out, but in. And it begins with a willingness to meet yourself fully. To live among others, a mask is necessary. It's not deceit, it's adaptation. From childhood, you are taught to perform, to hone your skills, to present yourself in ways that earn approval and avoid rejection. You become a good student, a reliable friend, a competent professional. These roles help you navigate the world, but they aren't your entire essence. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the outward identity shaped by cultural norms and social necessity. It's the image you wear like armor in the marketplace of the world. The persona, wrote Jung, is what someone is not in reality, but what oneself, as well as others, think one is. At first, the persona is simply a tool, but over time, it hardens. It becomes a mirror in which even you begin to mistake your reflection for reality. You forget the one behind the mask, and gradually you start to believe that the performance is the person. The danger here isn't the mask itself, for every society demands certain roles, but in your over-identification with it. When the persona becomes rigid, it separates you from your emotional truth, your intuitive depths, and your creative wildness. It silences the parts of you that don't fit the costume, and so your soul languishes beneath layers of performance. You wear a different persona at work, with friends, with strangers, each version meticulously calibrated to fit the moment. But deep down, you may feel a dissonance, a strain, the cost of constantly concealing behind roles that no longer reflect who you are at the core. This fragmentation of identity leaves the self without anchor. A life lived solely through the persona can be socially successful but spiritually empty. Because the soul doesn't speak through performance, it speaks in authenticity. And when the gap between who you appear to be and who you truly are becomes too great, the psyche reacts, sometimes with anxiety, sometimes with dreams, sometimes with a breakdown. To begin the work of individuation, you must question the mask, not destroy it, for it serves a function but loosen its grip. Ask, what have I been hiding behind this role? What emotions have I stifled to maintain this image? What parts of me have been exiled in order to appear acceptable? You are not your persona. The mask is useful but not complete. To live only through it is to live a fragment of your truth. So you begin to take it off, cautiously, courageously, and in doing so you see the face that has been waiting behind the mask, not perfect, but real. There are parts of yourself you have buried, not because they are evil, but because they were once unwelcome, feelings deemed unacceptable, desires you were taught to suppress, truths too dangerous to speak aloud. These rejected fragments have not disappeared. They have simply retreated into the shadow. Carl Jung defined the shadow as everything you have rejected, denied, or repressed. Not only negative qualities like anger, envy, fear, and selfishness, but also your unclaimed gold, your creativity, your instinctive wisdom, your power, your sensuality, your capacity to say no. The shadow isn't the enemy. It's your unlived life. It's the self you had to abandon in order to survive. The truths that didn't fit your persona, the feelings that threatened your acceptance, the gifts you were too afraid to own. What you call darkness may simply be what has not yet been seen, and yet what is hidden does not rest. Everyone carries a shadow, wrote Jung, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it becomes. What you refuse to acknowledge in yourself does not vanish. It directs you from the depths. It manifests in your reactions, in your judgments, in your projections onto others. Have you ever felt an intense dislike for someone only to later realize with painful clarity that they were embodying something you had rejected in yourself? That's projection, one of the shadow's primary strategies. It reveals your inner conflicts through external mirrors. What you can't admit in yourself, you often find unbearable in another. But herein lies the turning point. The shadow, though uncomfortable, is not evil. It becomes dangerous only when it is ignored, denied, it festers. Accepted, it becomes a source of clarity, energy, and transformation. To engage in shadow work is not to shame yourself, but to reclaim yourself. It means looking into the places you've been afraid to see and finding not monsters, but misunderstood messengers. The part of you that is angry may be the part that knows how to protect your boundaries. The part that is envious may reveal your unfulfilled desires. The fear you've silenced may be a compass pointing toward a new beginning. You begin by noticing, by observing your reactions, by asking, what part of me is trying to speak here? And you hold the answer not with judgment, but with compassionate curiosity. The shadow isn't the end of your light. It's its beginning, because only what is conscious can be transformed, and only what is accepted can be healed. You don't find your soul by renouncing the darkness. You find it by entering into it and discovering that it too carries light. There comes a moment in every true inner journey when the path leads no longer through the light, but through the shadow. This moment isn't a mistake, it's an initiation. You've touched the mask, you've seen the cracks, but now you are called to descend, not as a punishment, but as a passage, to confront the unlived parts of yourself, to journey into the underworld of the soul, a place where your unspoken truths, repressed wounds, and forgotten instincts reside. This isn't a realm of shame, but a realm of reclamation, and it's here that the work becomes sacred. Carl Jung cautioned against the temptation to bypass this descent. One does not become enlightened, he wrote, by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. To become whole is to look directly at what you've once feared, not to be overwhelmed by it, but to integrate it, not to destroy it, but to befriend it. This confrontation isn't violent, it's courageous. You don't defeat the shadow like a warrior slaying a beast. You sit with it, you listen, you allow it to speak the truths that have been silenced. I am your anger, your sadness, your hunger, your magnificence. I am the part you couldn't bring yourself to love. I am the voice you left behind. And in that moment of recognition, something ancient begins to shift. Integration isn't about perfection, it's about homecoming, a return to the center where nothing is exiled and nothing is denied. In this act of inner embrace, you reclaim not only your lost wounds, but also your lost power. Energy returns, creativity awakens, authenticity deepens. Confronting the darkness isn't the death of the self, it's the rebirth of the soul. When light descends into the depths and meets the shadow with presence, a third is born. Not shadow, not light. The pharmacon. You are not meant to remain fractured. You are not meant to fear your own depths. You are meant to come full circle, to descend, to meet, to integrate, and to ascend, carrying the gold hidden in your darkness. The shadow isn't evil, but it is morally serious. It doesn't tempt with simple wrongdoing. It confronts you with uncomfortable truth. It doesn't lure you into sin. It reveals the complexity of what it means to be fully human. Within you live contradictions, the desire to heal and the instinct to harm, the impulse to speak truth and the fear that silences it, the need for control and the longing for surrender. To be whole is not to eliminate conflict, it's to learn to live with conscious tension. And that is the work the shadow demands. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow not as a villain to be vanquished, but as a part of the psyche requiring a moral effort to confront. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, he wrote, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. To integrate the shadow isn't simply to acknowledge your flaws, it's to recognize your capacity for darkness, your ability to hurt, to deceive, to dominate, to betray. Not because you are evil, but because you are human. Without this confrontation, you remain divided, projecting your disowned aspects onto others, blaming them for what you refuse to see in yourself. This is the root of projection, one of the psyche's most common defenses. What you don't acknowledge in yourself, you unconsciously attribute to the world around you. You might call others arrogant, refusing to admit your own need for recognition. You might call others manipulative, evading your own tendencies toward control. Projection defends the ego, but it fragments the soul. On a collective level, These projections become social shadows: racism, sexism, oppression, systems built not only on fear, but on the denial of humanity's darker instincts. For a culture to mature psychologically is to accept that it is capable of both great evil and great healing. Only by acknowledging both aspects can you consciously choose which path to walk. Without that acknowledgement, your choices are not truly your own. They are reactions, driven by unseen forces. Thus, to confront the shadow is to stand face to face with your full humanity, not to indulge it, but to take responsibility for it. The shadow isn't an obstacle to virtue. It's a necessary confrontation through which virtue becomes authentic. True morality begins not with perfection, but with integration. Only one who knows their darkness can truly choose the light. There are rivers in you yet to be crossed. There are fires in you yet to be lit. And in each of these inner realms reside forgotten halves of your soul, the anima and the animus. Carl Jung spoke of these archetypes as inner bridges, the anima being the feminine image of the soul in a man, and the animus being the masculine image of the soul in a woman. But don't confuse them with social roles or cultural stereotypes. They are not shaped by society. They are primordial energies, symbolic expressions of the deep unconscious. They exist not in opposition, but in complement. The anima isn't simply emotion, nor is it simply gentleness. She's the river that flows beneath the surface of reason, carrying intuition, depth, feeling, beauty, imagination. In a man, she is often first encountered in dreams, visions, or moments of creative reverie. She is the inner mirror that reflects emotional truth, even when the surface remains calm. She is fire and water, moonlight and voice, a guide into the night garden of the soul. The animus, in turn, isn't dominance or control. He's the fire of clarity, the inner strength, the structure, the logic, the will. In a woman, he can manifest as the voice of reason, a sharp insight, or a growing confidence to act with authority. He is the seed of focused intention, the sword of discernment. He builds the bridges where the anima sings the rivers. To become whole is to know and integrate both, not by erasing differences, but by honoring them within oneself. You must welcome the anima if you are ruled by reason, just as you must awaken the animus if you are ruled by feeling. Each carries a medicine that the other lacks. You may encounter these energies in your relationships. You might project the anima onto a woman or the animus onto a man, falling in love not with the person, but with a reflection of your own soul. This isn't wrong, but it's not complete. The true task is to withdraw the projection and recognize this beauty, that strength, that wisdom. It lives in me too. The anima and the animus are not static parts of you. They are living archetypes evolving as you do. When you consciously engage with them, they become guides, not saboteurs. They lead you deeper into your unconscious, ushering you into realms of creativity, courage, insight, and unity. To know them is to begin to reconcile your inner polarities. To integrate them is to walk as one who is not divided within. And from that inner harmony, your outer life becomes a truer reflection. To become whole is not to become someone else, it's to become fully yourself. Yet the path to wholeness leads not only through the shadow and the memory, but through the balancing of inner opposites, anima and animus, the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine that live within every soul, regardless of outward form. Carl Jung understood that these inner archetypes weren't bound to biology. They are psychic energies, symbols of deeper principles, receptivity and assertion, nurturing and discipline, feeling and structure. They aren't in conflict unless you make them so. They seek not dominance, but integration. Wholeness, Jung wrote, is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of opposites. It is an individual task and a collective need. In a society that often enforces rigid scripts around gender, prescribing who can be strong, who can be sensitive, who can lead, who can yield, the psyche suffers. When you suppress your anima, you lose the capacity to feel intuitively, to imagine, to weep. When you reject your animus, you renounce your ability to speak truth, to build, to act with focused strength. The cost of suppression is imbalance. And imbalance leads to distortion not only within you, but in the world you help to shape. When these energies are unacknowledged, they don't disappear. They manifest in projections, in conflicts, in unintegrated relationships, in the cultural shadow. But when you recognize these forces within yourself, when you allow them to speak to one another, a new harmony begins. The anima becomes your guide into the depths, not a saboteur. The animus becomes your ally in clarity, not your tyrant. They no longer fight, they dance. To transcend gender within yourself isn't to become neutral. It's to embody your full psychic potential. It's to know the gentleness that stands firm, the strength that listens, the will that flows like water, the discernment that burns like fire. You were never meant to live as half a soul. You were meant to become the full spectrum, balanced, responsive, alive. And when that inner union begins, the outer world reflects its healing. There are moments in life when the ground falls away, a relationship ends, a calling loses its meaning, illness arrives, the silence becomes unbearable. You stand at the edge of something vast and uncertain, and the old answers no longer apply. This isn't an ending, it's a threshold. Crisis, in the language of the soul, isn't chaos for the sake of chaos. It's the unconscious demanding attention, a call to transformation. Carl Jung often spoke of such moments as turning points, not tragedies. What appears to be a breakdown may actually be an initiation, the beginning of a descent into the deeper self. Painful events aren't random punishments. They're often the psyche's way of interrupting the performance, of breaking through the persona so that a buried truth can rise. The death of what no longer serves makes way for something more essential, more lasting, but only if you're willing to walk through the fire with your eyes open. You may feel lost. That's natural. You may feel broken. That too is part of the path. But beneath the confusion lies an opportunity, not to return to who you were, but to become who you are. Crisis shatters the ego so that the self may emerge. And into that crack, the light pours in. Jung taught that every fall, every so-called dark night of the soul, carries within it the seed of transformation. Just as a seed must crack before a tree can grow, so too must the psyche crack to release what has long been suppressed. These moments are unveilings of the soul, not failures. They ask you to stop striving and start listening. They ask you to leave the surface and, for a time, to descend into the depths, not in solitude, but in the company of your own hidden wisdom. You aren't being punished. You're being called inward, downward, homeward, and when the descent is complete, when the pain has been witnessed and the fragments gathered, you don't return as you were. You rise not unscathed, but transformed, with eyes that see deeper, with a heart that holds more, with a soul that has touched its truth. There are many voices within you, not because you are broken, but because you are vast. The shadow, the persona, the anima, the animus, these aren't enemies waging war within the psyche. They are archetypal parts, ancient patterns of being, each carrying its own truth, its own pain, and its own gift. Suffering begins not because they exist, but because they have been divided. Carl Jung taught that healing doesn't come through eradication. The path to wholeness isn't forged by cutting away what doesn't fit. It's walked through integration, gathering all that has been exiled and returning it to the sacred center of the self. The psyche isn't a machine to be fixed. It's a living symbol, a relational cosmos woven from dreams and instincts, emotions and images. Each archetype, the rejected shadow, the adapted persona, the gendered soul images of anima and animus, must be seen, honored, and brought into right relationship. Imagine the psyche as a great inner temple. When the persona dominates, the true self is exiled. When the shadow is rejected, it becomes monstrous. When the inner masculine or feminine is suppressed, the temple echoes with imbalance. Integration is the act of inviting each figure back into the circle, to sit, to speak, to be known. This work is mystical because it operates not with logic, but with symbols. And it's holistic because it seeks not perfection, but unity through paradox. You are both light and dark. You are rational and instinctive. You are many, and yet you are one. Individuation, therefore, isn't a striving for purity, but for harmony. It's the sacred task of becoming a soul in concord, not by choosing sides, but by bringing all sides into conscious communion. Healing begins when you stop trying to purify the psyche and start communing with it. When you ask not what must I destroy to be whole, but what must I reclaim to be whole, there is no part of you unworthy of return. There is no archetype that doesn't belong. When the inner fragments are reunited, you don't become someone else, you finally become yourself. Within you is a presence that has been with you from the beginning, not shaped by your name, not limited by your past. It's deeper than thought, wider than emotion. It watches as your life unfolds, quietly awaiting the day you turn inward. And remember, you were never only the surface. Carl Jung called this presence the self, the ultimate archetype of wholeness, the central truth around which the psyche revolves. The self, he wrote, is not only the center, but also the whole circumference that embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of that wholeness. Imagine it as a mandala, a sacred circle, with the ego at the center and the symbols of your soul arranged in spiraling symmetry around it. The self isn't the ego, it's what the ego revolves around. It's the complete integrated personality, the living union of all that you are and all that you are becoming. It is both the seed and the flower, the fire and the stillness, the still point and the turning world. It's what the persona conceals, what the shadow guards, what the anima and animus reflect. It's not merely psychological, it's numinous, radiating from within like an echo of the divine in human form. To seek the self is to move beyond the ego's desire to control and identify. It's to bow before something greater, a mystery at your core. The self is not your creation. It's your birthright. It's not something to earn. It's something you remember. All the work of individuation, shedding the persona, integrating the shadow, balancing the inner masculine and feminine, prepares the soul for an encounter with the self. And that encounter isn't only a psychological fulfillment, it's a spiritual awakening. As the self begins to manifest, you begin to live not in fragments but in harmony. You sense an alignment of mind and body, instinct and intuition, soul and circumstance. Life ceases to be a battlefield of opposing parts. It becomes a dialogue, a rhythm of visible wholeness. To live from the self is not to escape the world, but to re-enter it as one who walks with presence, speaks with clarity, loves with depth, and suffers with meaning. The self is the great circle of your being. You stand at its center, and you are also its circumference. Not one, but both. When the self is no longer a distant ideal, but a living center, something shifts. The world beyond you may remain chaotic, unpredictable, and full of noise, but within, a quiet axis forms. This doesn't eliminate suffering, it doesn't eliminate conflict, but it does provide a deeper mooring, a kind of wholeness that no storm can truly scatter. To live from the self is to live from a place of inner concord. You no longer act to be seen, to be validated, or to maintain a mask. You act because something within you resonates, because a deeper voice has spoken, and it feels true. This life isn't marked by perfection, it's marked by integrity. You don't need to be flawless, you need only be whole, speaking with honesty, feeling with presence, choosing from the center, not the circumference. From that rootedness, a new kind of power arises, not loud but firm, not aggressive but unshakable. You become less reactive, not because you no longer feel, but because you are no longer driven by fragments. The shadow is known, the mask is seen, the anima and animus are balanced, and the self, that sacred presence, is near. Jung taught that individuation, the movement toward the self, brings with it a capacity for discernment. You begin to listen, not only with your ears, but with your soul. Intuition sharpens, patterns become clear. Your decisions arise no longer from fear or compulsion, but from a felt sense of inner rightness. This is what it means to live a soul-centered life. It's not a detachment from the world, but a deep engagement with it from a state of wholeness. It means walking slowly, speaking sincerely, loving deeply, and suffering consciously. and through it all remaining true to the self that has guided you through every darkness. You won't always be certain, but you will be connected. And in that connection, life finds a meaning that cannot be taught, only lived. Moment by moment, breath by breath, soul by soul, you weren't born to be perfect, you were born to be whole. In the quiet wisdom of the soul, paradox is not a problem. It's the language of truth. Carl Jung knew this deeply. He didn't seek purity or flawlessness, but integration. He taught that healing doesn't come through simplification, but through embracing contradiction. The modern world glorifies perfection, the flawless image, the polished personality, the uninterrupted stride. But the self speaks differently. It invites you not to be one, but to be many, strong and tender, rational and instinctive, joyful and grieving, all at once, all as one. To be whole is to carry both light and shadow without shame. It's to feel the tension of opposites and not rush to resolve them. It's to understand that inner conflict doesn't signify failure, it signifies aliveness. In paradox lies a sacred mystery. The more you accept your fear, the more courageous you become. The more you embrace your darkness, the more light you radiate. The more you acknowledge your need, the more power you discover. Wholeness doesn't require you to be flawless. It requires only that you welcome every part of yourself to the table. As Jung observed, the self is a mandala, a symbol of wholeness that includes all opposites, all contradictions. It's the still point where all the tensions of the psyche come into dynamic equilibrium. Thus, your healing comes not through erasure, but through relationship, not by cutting away, but by drawing in. The soul is not pure, it's whole. It's stained with tears, marked by memory, illumined by longing. And yet it is beautiful, and yet it is complete. So, release the burden of striving for perfection. Choose instead to become fully yourself. Paradoxical, complex, alive. And in that courageous, unvarnished becoming, you will find something greater than perfection. You will find peace. Individuation isn't a trend or a technique. It isn't a self-improvement strategy, nor is it a ladder to climb towards success. It's a sacred rite, an initiation into the unfolding of the soul. Those who walk this path are pilgrims, not performers. Carl Jung viewed the psyche as inherently spiritual, not in a dogmatic sense, but in its deep yearning for meaning, mystery, and transcendence. The journey inward isn't merely about knowing yourself psychologically. It's about awakening to the divine dimension. That breathes through every symbol, every dream, every whisper of the unconscious. The process of individuation is a liturgy of the soul, a sacred choreography through which opposites are reconciled, masks are shed, wounds are redeemed, and a deeper self is revealed. It's not a straight road, but a spiral, circling ever closer to the numinous center that has always been within you. At the heart of this journey lies a revelation. What you seek outside yourself, the truth, the love, the wholeness, even God is already present in the depths of your own being. The self, in Jung's view, is both the wholeness of the individual and an image of the divine within. To approach it is to cross a threshold between the human and the sacred. This is why psychological growth and spiritual awakening aren't separate paths. They are one unfolding, two names for the same descent and ascent. As you integrate the shadow, soften the persona, balance the anima and animus, you are clearing the inner temple for something greater to emerge, not fabricated but remembered. The symbols that arise in your dreams, the figures that confront you in imagination, the longings that unexpectedly pierce you. These are all sacred messages, signs that a deeper self is awakening, calling, guiding. Individuation isn't an escape from the world, it's an encounter with it in a transformed way, living from a place where the ego no longer rules but serves, where life is no longer a performance but a prayer. You aren't merely healing a mind, you are awakening a soul. And in that awakening, you don't become someone new. You become who you always were beneath the forgetting. A living image of mystery, a return to wholeness. The journey that began with oblivion ends not with discovery, but with remembrance. All along the way, the soul wasn't lost. It was only covered, not lost, only waiting. Beneath the layers of shadow, beneath the voices of culture and the noise of fear, it remained quiet, vigilant, eternal. Carl Jung spoke with a deep reverence when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who your wounds tried to make you, but who you were always meant to be from the beginning." Each descent into the unconscious, each confrontation with the shadow, each moment of vulnerability, each act of self-truth was a step homeward. What you sought in the outer world was never truly there. The map was inner, the voice was inner, the temple too. You aren't becoming something new. You are returning to the self that has always been yours, not perfect but whole. And now you stand at the threshold of your own becoming, not as a seeker longing, but as a soul remembering. The path of individuation hasn't made you someone different. It's unveiled a truth you carried all along. May it be your blessing that you trust the whispers within more than the noise without, that you walk not in fear, but in the quiet strength of your own consent, that you embrace your complexity and extend grace to your contradictions, that you cease chasing approval and begin embodying your truth. Your soul isn't waiting in the heavens, it's waiting in the deep well of your own being, where silence lives, where symbols speak, where the self breathes. It hasn't abandoned you, it's only been waiting for you to remember. And now you remember. Welcome home.